American system of checks and balances does not work through magic. It needs its other leaders, judges, bureaucrats, generals, above all politicians, to speak out and act when they see blatant abuses of power. In a brilliant essay in The Atlantic, the historian Ann Applebaum reminds us that collaboration is actually quite common. It is principal dissent that is rare. She invokes the non-fiction masterpiece The Captive Mind by the Polish poet Czeslaw Milosz, which describes how collaboration provides a relief. It means no more struggle with your ideals, no more internal turmoil. Once the collaborator has come to terms with his decision, Milosz wrote, he eats with relish, his movements take on vigor, his color returns, he sits down and writes a positive article, marveling at the ease with which he writes it. Milosz could well have been describing Lindsey Graham, who in 2015 said this about Trump.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot.
Then in 2018, he announced on The View with a hearty chuckle that he no longer believed any of that. Applebaum notes that Milosz is one of the few writers to acknowledge the pleasure of conformity, the lightness of heart that it grants, the way it solves so many personal and professional dilemmas. Explaining how Trump creates complicity, Applebaum cites a small example right from the start of his presidency. In the days after the inauguration, you remember he decided to insist that the crowds at his ceremony were larger than any before, though the evidence clearly contradicted him. Responding to Trump's speak, his press secretary then lied publicly, and the Park Service altered photographs of the events. Applebaum compares this action to the kinds of propaganda posters that the Soviet Union routinely put out, often about trivial matters which they knew their citizens would not believe. The point of the posters, she writes, was not to convince people of a falsehood. The point was to demonstrate the party's power to proclaim and promulgate a falsehood. Sometimes the point isn't to make people believe a lie, it is to make people fear the liar. We can see how this process has worked in the Trump presidency. It started with the small matter of the inauguration photographs, but kept on going. He then made bogus claims that he actually won the popular vote because millions of people voted illegally, that China pays for his tariffs, that Alabama was at risk from Hurricane Dorian, that windmills cause cancer, and that he did not pressure the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden. As president, Trump has lied or misled almost 20,000 times by the Washington Post's count. And Republicans have repeated those lies, at first hesitantly, but increasingly with a lightness of heart, marveling at the ease with which they can justify their acquiescence. If the United States does descend further down a dark path, much blame will lie with these Republican leaders, Donald Trump's cheerful collaborators.